everyone, and welcome back to Candler in Conversation, our platform for conversations about faith, theology, and public life, hosted by the Candler Foundry. My name is Crystal Golden, and I am the program coordinator for the Candler Foundry and today's conversation facilitator. Today, I'm joined by 4 guests who will help us unpack what it means to work with young people at this time as we answer the question, what do we say to our youth? So first, we have the Reverend Darlene Hutto. Darlene is an ordained itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Since 2007, she has been a staff person at the Forum for Theological Exploration, her current role being the Director of Experience Design. Darlene graduated with her MDiv degree from Candler in 2007 is returning this year as a candidate in the DMin program. Thanks for being here, Darlene.
Thank you for having me, Crystal. Wonderful to be here.
Next, we have Minister Jillian Lee. Jillian, commonly known as MJ, serves as the Minister of Wired Youth Ministry at Berean Christian Church in Stone Mountain. She's passionate about youth and young adults and aims to demonstrate to them and others the value they possess in the body of Christ. In addition, she is a third-year MDiv student at Candler, and her academic emphasis is on theology and ethics and their intersection with preaching and practical ministry. Thanks for being here, Jill.
Glad to be here.
Next, we have Dr. Jill Weaver. Jill is the director of the Youth Theological Initiative in its companion program, YTI Impact. She is a graduate of both Candler and the Graduate Division of Religion at Emory, and she's dedicated to facilitating the empowerment of youth to transform our world. Thank you for being here also, Jill.
Glad to be here.
And finally, we have the Reverend Candace Wynn, a 2009 graduate of the MDiv program at Candler and also an itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Candace is currently a youth ministry specialist for Orange, a division of the Rethink Group. As a youth ministry specialist, Candace has the privilege of carrying out her youth ministry calling by training, coaching, and consulting with youth pastors around the world. Thank you for being here, Candace.
Thanks for the invite, Crystal.
If you are watching us live, we appreciate your engagement. So feel free to add your questions and your comments to our guests in the feed. So for today's conversation, we want to shift our focus to young people and how they are experiencing this time, and how we as youth ministers, pastors, caregivers, leaders, and guardians can best support them. So we all know that there is a lot happening. We are still living in a pandemic. We have an upcoming presidential election. We have continued social unrest. There's also the question of how we navigate academic institutions while also having to remain flexible to ongoing changes, on top of our young people developing into adults. And so the learning, the discovering, everything that happens from childhood to emerging adulthood. And so my first question, and I'll allow whoever wants to start to answer this. How have you been holding space for young people as they experience this time?
I'm happy to share initially. So at FTE, we've taken several approaches. Our initial approach was to, in the wake of this pandemic, we canceled a number of our meetings. We host the annual discernment retreat for young adult leaders and ages 18 to 30. And so the idea of waiting for another year to engage when such a critical time was before us, we thought about how can we begin to engage those young people, and how do we see convening virtually as an opportunity. So we hosted a couple of sessions where we actually brought those young adults with with other grantee partners in our work. So it's kind of the model of the elder and the young adult. And then from that conversation, we realized that our young adults wanted to be convened by themselves. And so in convening them, we took the time to listen to them. But ironically, our initial kickoff session with those young adults was just to establish a time for them to introduce themselves. And the energy from just having a space to say, this is who I am and this is what I'm going through, really spoke volumes in this particular time to our young adult leaders. And so from there, we listened to what some of their needs were. And from that moment, it allowed us to speak to those needs by offering some additional resources for them to feel supported in this time of disorientation. So we have begun a series of convenings for those young adults, offering them spiritual direction, opportunities for small group accompaniment with peers, and projecting toward an online virtual discernment retreat in the fall to help them continue the kind of engagement that we would have had in person. But in this moment, it allows us to speak to them in such a really critical and pivotal time.
Mm-hmm. And where all are your young adults from?
So our young adults are nominated into our work by our partners. We um, sponsor, well, we host coordination programs through the Lilly Endowment with campus ministers. So they come from those networks. And they also come from campus ministers and pastoral leaders who nominate them. And there is a selection process for that group, but convening virtually has also allowed us to expand our work to other young adults as well. So it is a nomination process where we acquire them. So we selected approximately 60 young adults who were slated to attend a discernment retreat in person, and now we are convening them virtually through a variety of resources.
Mm-hmm. Thank you,
They're
Darlene.
all over. To answer your question, they're all over the U.S. And in some instances, Canada. Yeah.
Jill or Jillian?
Sure. Jill, did you want to go or you want me to jump in?
Sure. Go ahead and jump in.
Okay. So I kind of wear two hats a little bit. As was read earlier, I'm a youth minister in terms of like my job, but I'm a Candler student as well. I'm 23, so not super seasoned in the work, but just glad to be able to participate. So with regard to what my church has been doing, again, Berean Christian Church is my church in Stone Mountain, and so of course churches in terms of gathering in person, is prohibited. It's closed. And so we really had to pivot and figure out ways to engage the congregation as a whole, but especially our youth. And so I kind of took it upon myself to like come to my pastor and our leadership team and be like, hey, like we still need to do things for our teens, just to make sure that they were engaged and didn't feel, left out to the side or just kind of like, we're in a pandemic, we'll see you when we get back. And so our primary means of engagement has been social media. That's where they kind of inhabit anyway. And so we've been doing a lot of work on Instagram Live. We've been doing a lot of work on YouTube, and we've found ways to engage them daily with like daily devotions that we'll post on the Instagram story. They'll be able to tune into services live on Tuesdays and Sundays for like small group Bible study. And then Sunday morning, we just had our virtual youth conference that happens every July in person, but we shifted that and did that virtually. So that's just been kind of some of the ways that we've been engaging them, and they've been overwhelmingly responsive, which is so awesome. On the Candler YTI front, which I'm so grateful and privileged to be a part of, I was like a YTI like scholar person in my first year. And so Jill just so graciously, I don't even know why she thought of me, but Jill asked me to come alongside her during this time to do some work with our anti-racism groups and other affinity support groups for YTI scholars to engage them and support them through this time. So that's a little bit of what we've been doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll say, of course, I thought of you, Jill. Jill is awesome. I thought of you before too, but you were not available. So yeah, she's hard to get. She's always booked. Really... Yeah. So obviously we couldn't have the Summer Academy, which is usually a recently 2-week program that is residential and on campus. There was no way that was going to happen. We had sometimes people come from all over the world. So this was certainly not an option. And also we wanted to respond not just to the coronavirus crisis, but the ways in which it's hard to describe the racial crisis, because it's not as if anything is new. It's just as if awareness has shifted and interest has shifted among certain groups. And also the increased awareness increases stress for youth who identify as Black. And so we wanted to be able to respond to that in a way. And so we started 2 weekly groups. One, which Jill will have to tell you about because I'm not a part of it, is a group just for youth who identify as Black. And it's a space for them to give and receive support and to learn some self-care skills and sort of strengthen, that muscle within them. And then the other group is open to all youth, and it's youth who are interested in anti-racism. And so we meet weekly. This week we talked about whiteness, just wanting to point out that if anyone's going to have a race, everyone has a race, and that white folks are not the default. And race is not a very old concept, and whiteness is an even newer concept. And so we talked about that. We talked about the historical shifts in what was and wasn't white, in order to kind of give them a sense of just how made up this is, and to talk about its impact and the ways in which it's been used in social structures, to kind of keep things the way folks want them to be who have the most power. So next week, we're going to shift to how that relates to Christianity, because of course, Christianity in the US is completely entangled with the history of white supremacy. So that's where we're headed next week.
That's so cool that you all are doing that, Jill and Jillian. I love that. I mean, that's amazing. So I don't necessarily work within the context of the church. I can probably respond to this question from the perspective of just the role I serve in, just coaching and consulting different youth leaders and youth pastors. And when things first shut down due to COVID, engagement for most youth pastors, I would say, the digital engagement, they were connecting digitally. Some did not have the capacity or the ability to really connect digitally initially. Some have, since adjusted, some have not, but initially, for those who were connecting digitally, digital engagement was really, really strong, but over the months, the initial excitement of it just wore off, and students were getting on, barely getting on. If they are getting on, they're not turning their cameras on, they're muted, you're looking at their ceiling fans. It's just a lot of different things that have been tremendous barriers for youth leaders to try to still connect with, but since people are becoming a little bit more, relaxed, regardless of what people's perspective, and thoughts are, there's been a lot that's happened in the world, right, over the past couple of months. And our young people are not exempt from needing care and needing pastoring and needing support. So churches have tried to figure out the best way to connect with their students. Now I'm seeing an uprise and a lot of people connecting through home groups, trying to either get their youth ministries to meet outside, spaced out, or just meeting in someone's backyard, their basement, their living room, just for an opportunity for connection. Because many schools are starting up. Some are meeting face to face, some are virtual. You might even hear my kids screaming downstairs because they're in school, right? Just the reality of a lot of people's lives right now. So the one opportunity I do think that the church has right now is the ability to potentially provide a safe place in a community for people who so desperately need a community and who are struggling in many, many different ways. with either feeling isolated, disconnected, anxiety, depression, all different things, that everything that has happened in the world, from, you know, racial injustice to the pandemic to, you know, bombing to fires, you know, to whatever is going on in the world. There's a lot that's happening, and it's a great, you know, a lot of people are trying to figure out how they can adjust and how they can connect. And I think it's just people are, for the most part, doing the best that they can.
Thank you for that, Candace. You all mentioned living and working and ministering in this digital age. What are some of the best strategies that you've seen to keep kids and young people from not being overly zoomed out, but still engaged?
I'll kind of jump in with that one. To Candace's point, we saw an interesting trend happen over the past almost 6 months that we've been in quarantine with engagement, live engagement. And so what we found became very helpful was to do our live services, do live stream engagement, but to also, of course, leave it up so that they could come back to it at their leisure. And we actually surprisingly found that there were a lot more teens coming back to it at their leisure than jumping on live. And as a youth minister, I got to the point where I was like, whichever way you get the word, get it. You know, it didn't matter to me so much if it was 2 people on the live or 200 people. We saw that a lot of people were coming back and watching it at noon instead of 9 a.m., right? Or like another day, or they needed a midweek pick-me-up. And so that was a way that we started to observe kind of what was happening. The beauty about social media, if we leverage it properly, is they have this thing called analytics, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with. And so you can see the way, the time, the day, the mode in which people are engaging, and start to curtail the way that you are posting or doing various things in that way that meets their needs. And so we've just tried to remain attentive and flexible about what that looks like. And sometimes it just means getting on live for 5 minutes, right? Today's sermon is going to be a 10-minute encouragement, right? Like today's Bible study is just going to be a check-in. How are you doing? Or maybe we're going to sit on Zoom, everyone mute themselves, and we're just going to watch each other do homework, right? Like we've just got to figure out how to do this in a way that is not so draining. I don't know about you, my eyes get tired at the screen now. Like there's a lot happening. And so even if it just means finding other, nuanced ways to do that. We've met in the parking lot for different parts of things in abbreviated periods of time. Everyone stays in their car, but just to feel like you're with people. I think those are just some of the ways that we're making sure they don't get too burnt out.
I'd like to add something as kind of a side note. I want to say to parents, I've heard a lot of parents feeling really frustrated with their youth and the youth's desire to be with their friends. And at YTI, from David White, we talk about youth having certain charism, certain gifts of their moment in life. And one of the gifts of the youth moment in life is their deep desire and need for community. And so I just want to ask parents to have some empathy around that and understand that they need it in a different way than we do as adults. I always tell YTI scholars, I'm good to stay at home and watch Netflix. When you get to my age, you're happy with that sort of thing, but they need it, and that's the gift of their age. And it's what makes them experience life the way they're supposed to and be part of community the way they're supposed to. And so, not to say to be unsafe, but just to ask parents to have some empathy around how that need is different. It's not as if they're being more indulgent or anything like that. Like they literally need it more than we do. Yeah.
Yeah, to your point, Jill, I realize that we assume that because they're digital natives that these methods work well for them, but they're leveraged differently by them. And so to your point, having some empathy, observing them, allowing them not to fall into these periods of despair and getting creative about ways that they can engage their peers. I'm privileged to co-parent a couple of young folks and young people, 13 and 18-year-old. And, I've been checking in with them about this moment in time, and they do miss their friends. And, even there is a unique dynamic in the classroom when you're all together, even though structured, than it is to sit at a screen and engage your teacher. So these are moments where I do offer a lot of empathy and support to our youth. Concerning our young adults, some of those shifts that are happening is from our conversations is that, some have said, did COVID know that I had a vision board for this year? Or did COVID know that I was planning on doing this particular unique experience that I had planned? And so in those moments, some of them have had to be fiercely independent and then return home with parents. Well, that I remember doing that, and that was not my favorite thing to do. And so in this moment, they are wrestling with a number of things, including having a sense of hope in this moment concerning their best laid out plans. And so many of those plans have been reshaped as it relates to their engagement with the world around the unrest in our country and in the ways that they had imagined their call or sense of call, purpose, and passion playing out in very different ways. And in some ways, that's been exciting. But having a sense of community in these virtual spaces has been really key. We have worked to we typically host our small group sessions in groups of 10. We in virtual settings we drill them down to 5 so that folks have more time to talk as they are able, and then also more time to reflect with hopes that they are likely to share in a smaller dynamic that feels safer than these, the ways that our Zoom screens can really get filled up with 20 or more people. So those are some of the things that we're listening for and experimenting in our work at FTE, and some of the things that I'm noticing personally as I'm engaging my 13-year-old.
So speaking of listening, does anyone else have anything to offer about helping youth and young adults do deep listening? Because there's so much to listen to. So how does one who is young, who is still just trying to figure out life, slow down to listen?
No, let Candace go.
Oh, so yeah. So I think, gosh, I've got a lot for that, a lot of thoughts for that. So I think that a huge part of it comes to with just in just follow me here, is with teaching spiritual disciplines, right? Because the truth is, a lot of times, I'll speak about me just as an example of what I mean. When I was growing up in the church, I wasn't necessarily taught the word spiritual disciplines. I was taught you got to read your Bible, you got to pray, and then there was a little bit of fasting that was dibbled and dabbled every now again, in there. But for me, I've always struggled with, and I'll just, being fully transparent, I've always struggled with taking a minute in the day and just stopping and, dear God, I come before you as humbly as I know how, right? It just has not always come natural to me, right? And I get that there has always been people say, oh, you gotta, exercise, yada, yada, yada. But I'm even saying this in the more mature spiritual place, right? And it was not until I was in seminary and my therapist helped me to reintroduce myself to me, that I learned how to really engage in some spiritual disciplines that were more natural to me, that helped me to discern the voice of God. And that was through different avenues in which I love, right? So one of the things that I've always done when it comes with students about just encouraging them to listen and to be discerning and engage in God is through introducing them to spiritual disciplines, but through the avenue of things in which you love. I love art. I absolutely love creating, and I just can't get my eyes off that picture behind Darlene, right? Because I just love art. And through creating art, I hear God speak to me. When I have to write a sermon, I will get a piece of paper and I will just start doodling and drawing. I will, read different things and research, but after I do all that, I will really just process it through doodling and drawing and creating. And it's through that process that I'm able to slow down and hear the voice of God and look at the final product and realize how God has processed it all through me, but that came with some, going up against some traditional ways of saying this is what you have to do, and me being more confident and comfortable in who it is that God has created me to be as an artist, right? And I didn't even know that about myself until I was in my 20s, so I lived a whole long time. And I think opening some of those doors up for students to just experience themselves and experience the God in them in that way is helpful. A lot of times within the church, we try to say, all the things in the world are distracting and they're worldly, and we need to shut out all things that are worldly. But I think the truth of the matter is the outside world is only competition, and it's only really just like, a negative thing when we're trying to mimic what's done outside in the world within the context of the church. Many churches will never be able to produce in the caliber of Disney and Pixar and that kind of quality, right? Some churches will never be able to do that. Just reality, right? But if we engage in a way that is authentically pure and meets a true need of connecting with who they are and who God has created them to be, then we're connecting with students in a way that Disney and Pixar or whoever else is just purely unable to do. And sometimes we compete instead of leveraging those things, right? So say if a student is connected to, say if a student just loves music and loves all types of music, why not engage them to hear the still small voice in the thunder and in the whisper through the hymn and the secular music, right? Because being connected to that has their ear, will help them to have their ears to the ground to be able to connect with somebody else in a godly way, and through engaging their world that they might be a part of. That's how we begin that relationship for them to want to listen to us to talk about, the work that God is doing in them. Because if you just come to me and just start, you need to be shutting out all the outside world and just listen to God and discern God. Okay, that's cool. But we've all heard, it said that, people don't care about what you know until they know about how much you care. And if you enter my world and you learn me, then you'll learn how to engage me and process me. Then one day I might ask you, so what's up with that thing that you do over there? And then that might be a door for a conversation to be opened about, in conversations of faith and hearing God and engaging in all of that.
That's so good, Candace. And there's so much praise for you in the comments right now.
Oh.
Does anybody else want to jump onto that question?
Well, I couldn't shake my head enough, I wanted to do the Zoom. YTI has always tried to be alternative. That's been kind of at the heart of who we are, in terms of recognizing that the world is shaping youth in a way that distorts and frustrates and is not great for faith development. And so, one of the ways in which we try to be countercultural is in the way we view youth, because we, always tell them about how the idea of adolescence is not very old. And living the way youth have lived is even less old. It, really since like the 1940s that we've, and of course, in recent decades, adolescence has extended further and further. And what the world tells them is, you're training to be a human being. This is your time to prepare for the rest of your life. And what we try to say at YTI is, no, this is your life right now. And there are gifts of your age that the world needs. If you think of the body of Christ, this is a very important part of the body. And what youth do, we talked before about loving community. They also ask lots of questions. They have not yet accepted the way things are as the way they have to be. And they have more energy, way more energy. And so, these are gifts that the world needs. And this is the reason why that age group has often been the drivers of social change. And so at YTI, we try to unleash that by, treating them with full respect as human beings already existing now who have lives already. And what I would say about then to your question about helping them to listen is the most important thing is for us to listen to them deeply. That might be the most important thing. And the other thing is I've known youth, it's so natural to have questions as a human being, but especially in their age. And sometimes they get the message that questions are the opposite of faith, that they're a sign of doubt. But I want to tell them that questions are a sign of faith. And if you look at Jacob wrestling with God, that's when he became who he was supposed to be and received the name Israel. And so their questions are holy. That is a holy practice for them to ask the questions that are natural to their age. And so I want to tell them that is okay, and that it's a sign of their commitment and faith being alive in them. And listen to them. I think that helps them.
Jill, that reminds me of one of my first jobs was working at a Presbyterian church in Charlotte, North Carolina. And as a person who grew up as in the Baptist church tradition, that whole notion of questioning God was like a no-no. And I remember one of the sermons where the pastor stated that wrestling with life's questions is the beginning to internal wisdom. And so when it is through those questions that we invite our young people the right question, the key is like, what is the right question? Or what, as we said, FT, what is the question that is waiting to be asked in the moment? And so when we ask our young people about, where are they resonating with the pain points of the world? That is often a key indicator of a space where God may be calling them or drawing them around their own interests that they haven't been invited to unearth. And so as we engage them in practices in our work, we are leveraging a number of facilitation practices. And our biggest challenge now has been, how do we bring forward that feeling of, or the embodied practice on the screen? And so we do that through facilitation methods where sometimes we may invite people to turn off the screen. There's some sources that have said, don't have everyone on mute. Let's invite everyone into the chaos that's a part of our present day reality. And we work our way through the facilitation method and through these conversations in that manner. Sometimes we leverage, inviting them to bring forward an image or something tactile that they can bring to the screen and say, hey, here's a picture of my big mama, and this is what this moment means to me. Or sometimes it may be having them talk about, a meal, food, all the things that we love, and bringing those very practical things forward as a way of kind of interrogating the bigger questions that are waiting to be unearthed in us. And so our approach has been, kind of the slow rhythm of reflection, so that it is counterintuitive to the way that the world is responding us to be right now. Everything's fast, and there's a lot of information in these Zoom streets that are being passed along. But in our experiences, we invite people to do something very counterintuitive, and that is to slow down. My pastor's wife told me in the beginning of this pandemic, Darlene, the Lord has slowed the world down. Take a hint. And so from that, slowing down these practices, setting a different rhythm, but also letting that rhythm be about personal, interpersonal engagement with them. And that's where they resonate, not necessarily coming from us as experts, but with their peers. And so we are just creating the conditions for them to engage with their peers around the things where they have some resonance.
I'd love to add to that really quickly, Reverend Darlene, because I think that that was so profound, and I feel like we're all in like the same wheelhouse with the way that we're approaching this, which I think is great in this context. I'll say something that I think YTI does amazingly is empowers youth to believe that there is something within them worth listening to, because I think that the ethic that the world sends and the message that the world sends to youth, that the church has absolutely affirmed and perpetuated, is that there is nothing within you or that God has to say to you that is worth listening to. Right? We tell them all of the don'ts and we seldom empower them for the do's. And then we wonder, to Jill's point, why they aren't becoming these amazingly, mysteriously magical, robotic, productive adults that we just think we just magically turn into. And so it begins to kind of call into question us as adults and interrogate us to say, how are we empowering them to believe that there is something even within them, in their environment, in their space, that is worth listening to? And this may be a little bit of projection based upon my personal experience. But one of the most challenging things that I have experienced with my youth at Berean, I think YTI youth, I think they just got it. Maybe it's just the way that they present themselves in that space, but they lack like the authorization to just like go for it. Like I think, and maybe I'll just be honest, and I don't want to generalize, but maybe it's some of the like Black experiences as well. We're a predominantly Black church. And so maybe it's just to like stay in out of grown folks' business, like go to the kids' table, like we'll come get you when we're ready. Like that kind of thing that sometimes we in the Black community do not like to acknowledge has really given youth messages that like you are not important, that you have to arrive as an adult to be deemed worthy enough to be in this space. And so how does that transfer to the way that we struggle with the listening piece? It's because I think that we have to start sending new messaging and inviting through the arts, through having the sermon be a craft day, which we have loved to do at Berean at this point, having moments for just actual listening. We did a meditative day one night for Bible study, and the room was quiet and it was all of these great things. And I had laid out like yoga mats and we just sat and listened, and kids just started crying because their body just had to release. They were like, what's happening? And they were just like, I didn't know I was carrying that. And so I think as we continue to create space to empower them to say, there are things to be attentive to in your body, in your mind, in your soul, to the Lord. Like, I think those are ways that we can start to help them with this listening thing. And I think YTI does an amazing job of that. And I've been blessed to be able to carry those things into, my own field. And you ladies are clearly doing that as well. So, yeah.
I want to jump back in here. Couple of things that were said here. Jillian, I'm 100%, I'm right there with you. I mean, actually everything I'm, over here 100% agreeing with. I'm actually taking notes on some of the things y'all are saying because this is just good, it's just good stuff, right? But I think that as a church, we have to be prepared to equip students to experience God. In whatever capacity that looks like, right? But just not only just experience God, but to also experience God working through them. And I think that's what, Jillian is getting at here, through different ways of leadership or service or whatever that may look like. We teach students to experience God working through them. Then they end up engaging God in different ways, and those outside things of the world aren't necessarily competition, or they don't come up against them in the same, still come up against them, but just not necessarily in the same kind of way. They view them different, and they're able to combat them differently when they have experienced God working through them. And to not give students opportunities to do those things teaches them that you don't believe that God can work through them. Right. And we have to always have, you might hear my kids in the background, I'm so sorry. But we have to always just let students know that they have that ability, they have that power, they have that God in them, and allow those that experience to pique their curiosity. And as God is revealing God's self to them, they are of course undoubtedly going to have questions. And that goes back to what Jill was saying, and I think Darlene, you mentioned this too. Maybe I don't remember which one of you said it at this point, but talking about not allowing students to ask questions. If you don't allow students to ask questions, then that indirectly teaches them that faith and God are fragile, and they can't handle the depths of our questions, right? And to allow students to process through asking those questions, it gives them the ability to independently decide and independently make decisions. And my independent decision is more powerful than something that you're force feeding me or you're telling me that I have to believe. I'll just stop there.
I just added, our young adults often say, if you say it's for us, don't do it without us. And so invite them
That's
into,
right.
invite their input into their own programming. Yes.
One thing I wanted to, is it okay, Kristen? I wanted to say in response to what Jill said, I don't think YTI scholars are different kids from the kids. What I think is that we are aided at YTI by taking them out of their organic context. And it's a bigger challenge, I think, within their own church, where they're surrounded by adults who have often interacted with them in this hierarchical way, to step outside of that. And so I think that's why that experience is different.
This is also great, and I'm having to write down my questions so I don't forget them because so many keep coming up. So one of them is related to one of the questions I sent, but we're talking now about having our kids being more comfortable with asking questions and us ourselves being more comfortable with them asking questions. What would you all say to parents and guardians who are doing church for the most part at home, where once we watch the Instagram live, we do the youth conference online, we log off for the night? Like, what would you say to guardians and parents who are navigating the questions as well?
I would say the same thing, that their questions are a sign of their faith, because I think adults don't know that either. And so when they see their teenagers asking questions, they worry about their faith. They're anxious that they are raising kids who are going to grow up and move away from the faith. And so they're afraid of the questions, and they're afraid of their own questions. And so to again and again say, questions are not a sign of doubt, they are a sign of faith, to say that to them. And to reduce their own anxiety around, as Candace said, this idea that faith is fragile or God is fragile. They need to reduce their own anxiety so they can help hold that space for their kids.
I think that's just where I was going to go with the last part of what Jill just said, because I think a lot of times as a parent, there are things that I have found myself saying because it was taught to me. And I'm constantly like, well, let me think about that. That doesn't make sense. Like, there's one that I just don't get. I don't get why it's so bad for a child to say that an adult has lied. If you lied, you lied, right? But I grew up within this whole mindset of children don't tell adults that they are liars. You didn't tell me that I was a liar. You said that I lied. And to me, that's just two different things. And you just called it what it was, right? And I think it might just be some of that breaking down the mindsets that have been taught to adults when it comes to them and raising their own kids, that they're just like, you can't ask me that. Yes, they can, because it just equips them better to be in a better position to articulate their faith and to be able to just engage it a little bit different.
I think the lack of resolution among adults and the jaded experiences we have continues to be spewed onto youth and young adults. altogether. I think Jill kind of hit on it a little bit earlier about how like youth and young adults even like don't have that filter, right? That mask that tells you like, this is acceptable, this is not, push this envelope, don't push that one, right? And so as life happens, right, it just does happen. Life happens, you just get more and more jaded and censored, and you feel like you have to be pigeonholed into this person and this identity, even where Candace talked about like, you have to relearn yourself. And I saw this post on Instagram, and it really blessed me because it said, I was today years old. I think that's like a slang term. Like I was today years old when I found out that finding myself was just returning to my younger self. And it was like mind blowing to me because I'm like, yo, that is what we do every single time. This kind of midlife crisis thing that we experience as adults is literally just returning back to our younger self that was unbridled, uncensored, was censored, passionate, was vibrant, and just went for it. And so as we as adults have to do the work and even encourage youth to do the work of being in therapy, having meditative practices, being centered with God, finding ways to be in tune, back to deep listening, we can become healthier and wholer as people so that we don't then project what really we have not reconciled as adults. And so we then project that on them to say, don't do this, do this, which is really informed by our jaded and hurt experiences. And then we find ourselves frustrated, to Jill's point about, I can be a synthesizer, frustrated to Jill's point about why we're upset as parents. I'm not a parent, but as upset as parents or adults for our kids needing community. Well, we haven't reconciled our slighted experiences with community, et cetera. And so then it filters into don't ask questions and all these things because we're scared of what kids are going to bring up for us. We're scared of what young adults are going to bring up for us. And if we don't deal with that, if we don't see somebody about that, if we don't go to the Lord about that, we're going to constantly live in this cycle where I'm trying to censor you to make myself feel comfortable. And that's not acceptable.
Girl, you said that. I'm sorry, I had to say. You said that. You said a whole word right there. Thank you.
This is so good, and we are running out of time. So I want to get to a few more of these questions. Jillian, can you speak more to the experience of leading the Black youth group with YTI this summer and what's coming from that?
Absolutely. So again, I'm so humbled and just blessed to be able to serve with YTI. I love YTI. Just the way that the organization is just founded and grounded and constantly committed to changing and evolving. Jill came to me kind of at the beginning of quarantine, and then when all things were kind of popping off of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and others, and was like, how can we continue to edit as an organization? How can we be attentive to the needs of our scholars, to the needs of their community, et cetera? What does that look like? And so after much deliberation and emails and things like that, Jill already had like these amazing ideas, and I was blessed to be able to just come alongside and support her in those ways. We came up with this idea, and Jill presented to have a group that would support students of color, Black students, people who identified as Black in various forms, and be able to gather with them to just provide support and help them work through and process what's going on through literature, through arts, through pop culture, through social media, et cetera. And so Iyabo Onapede is someone who is just amazing. And she's like our facilitator, and I'm just here to, support her and kind of co-facilitate with her, as well as Christopher Cross, who's also a third-year Candler student. And we have just kind of gathered every Monday in the evening time. School has definitely edited that a little bit. So we're working through, just the adjustments that are just continuing to happen. And so we're just able to gather with our youth, and we're reading through various literature, and we're using various resources to engage them and to help them critically think about what's going on. But sometimes it just serves as a space to just express, like, what are you feeling today? Students have talked about various things that have happened in their school with people saying the N-word or saying racial slurs to them or tying noose around brown teddy bears' necks and dragging them through school. I mean, just these very heinous experiences that they need to work through, that they need to process. And sometimes the day-to-day that we experience with our parents in our homes or even in our schools just doesn't afford that space. And so we've just been so grateful to be able to learn from them. At YTI, we talk about mutual learning and mutual experience. And so it's not something that we're doing to teach them, but we're allowing them to teach us. And it's just this beautiful dance of just community that is allowing Black students the space that they need, many in white spaces, in predominantly white schools. Some of them are former scholars, so now they're in college. And so they're constantly chewing on this information that they're getting and really interrogating this messaging that they have been socialized to accept. And so I couldn't be more proud of the work that they're doing.
And so what comes next from being in the group? Is there a faithful next step, as the Reverend Darlene would ask?
Jill, I can kick this one to you a little bit.
Well, we hope to keep them involved with YTI. We've left it sort of open-ended in terms of when the group will end for this first round of groups, for the group to have some sort of agency around that. But, we hope to keep them within the world, the environment of YTI, and to continue to work with them. And as far as taking like civil action and these types of things, I don't know that we've gotten that far in the process yet. We've met a few weeks, but yeah, it's not going to end. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep it from ending, the experience with this group of youth. And we're also going to start another round as soon as I can hire Candler students who are also busy with their own classes. I want to start offering a second round because we actually had more people interested than we were able to accommodate this first round, which was extraordinary and says something about their need and desire. So can I say something? I want to say one more thing about parents. I keep thinking, I'm a parent, and so I keep thinking about this. Another thing I would say to parents is look for God to speak to you through your child, And when Candace was saying that about you lied or whatever, they're whole human beings too, and they see things and they have wisdom, and expect it to happen, not just think it's possible. But looking for that, I think, is also something that can enrich that faith relationship between parents and kids.
So for my last question, I just want to ask you all, what gives you hope with working with youth and young adults?
So, for me, the fact that tomorrow is coming, right? I mean, I know that none of us know that the day or the hour, yada, 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 right? But one of the things that I absolutely love about working with young people is the fact that we have no idea what these students are going to grow up to become. We have no clue. We could really be laying the faith foundation for someone who could be a major scientist, president. I mean, you have no idea what the students who are in our ministries are going to become. And for me, that is the greatest hope for me, to just have an opportunity to pour into the future in that capacity. I feel like if there's any way that we can give back to the world is through pouring into our next generation. I think if anyone is in a position to change the future of the world when it comes to making a more loving world, a more just world, it's those who work with children and youth, because they have the opportunity to teach children and youth how to think and live through different filters. And public policy can change, laws can change, but if there is still a mindset of I'm better than you racially that's passed down, then over years, some of those laws might end up making their way back up to be, unjust again. But if we are really in a position and really teach students and children to think through different filters, then we create a whole new wave in the world of people and way more hope than what it is that we currently have. I think that, to me, that just gives me hope, just knowing that I have the possibility to change the world in that capacity.
Yeah, I echo Candace's sentiments. When I see the young people in our work in particular, they come with this deep sense of limitless potential. And I think it's a gift not to be marred with all of the crap that, many of us have, had layered on us through life experiences. And so they come with a particular innocence and a pure heart toward their questions. And then once they awaken into what's possible with their youthful energy and drive, um, the ways that they engage that through so many different beautiful lenses, where I've never seen so much rich content through the arts or through artistic expression. One of the things that Candace lifted up earlier, um, and also their sense of hope in our processes to see themselves as participants in change, in the arc of change. And, even as we look at these various movements and the ways that they are just taking charge and leading us all, has just been amazing to watch. And I think our task as I call myself kind of a bridge. I'm in this interesting place between the old perspective and a willingness to hear the fresh perspective, and then to bring those two together in a way that promotes understanding and clarity from both angles. So for the young person who may not have the resilience that our elders may have, instilling a sense of resilience in them, but through consistency and ongoing engagement, encouraging them not to give up. And for the older populace who, well, that's not how we did it. Well, you were once a young adult who did your thing a little differently than than those who preceded you. So promoting that kind of understanding. So I see a deep sense of hope in the promise of just in all that it is that they are. And our task is to be good mentors, to be great coaches. And being a good mentor and a great coach is not creating ourselves in someone else, but it's unearthing the potential that lies within them and then promoting them to move forward in the gifts and graces that God has given them to respond to their own unique sense of call, not to emulate us.
I think adults tend to lose hope when they indulge in the stereotypes about young people. And what I want to say about those stereotypes is that they are a symptom of the ways in which we've distorted the lives of adolescents. If you were required to live in this way where your agency was curtailed to the extent that theirs is, you would also rebel and do all these things. It would be really you wouldn't be able to stand it. You'd be burning things down. And so just to keep in mind and just sort of remember the ways in which we are distorting their lives, and for us to rethink what we're doing with adolescents in order to enable them to be the people they are, to have their own gifts that are within them, as Darlene was saying. Like, the world needs them to be who they are, and for us to stop preventing it more so than us making it. So
I think we could close there. No, I'm joking. That was profound. I just simply add just to say I think I'm encouraged and excited about the fearless resolve they have that I think we've all kind of just spoken to. If nothing else, I think these past few generations, mine included, have just, I mean, we are not gonna say, take no for an answer. Like, period. Like, we're not going to do it. And I think each generation has done that in their own way. But I think as the world continues to change and to grow and to expand, we are just going to kick the door down. And I'm sorry if that's your door. I'll get you a new one on the way out, but I'm going to kick it down today. Like, there is this fearless resolve that says, like, I have a conviction that I will not be silent about. Now, granted, speaking comes in various forms, right? Everyone's not going to come and give a keynote speech. Everyone's not going to be the person on the stage singing, but we have found ways to illustrate, iterate, and project and put on a platform what it is that we are feeling. And for youth, I want them to hold on to that. And I hope, I'm such an idealist, but I'm grateful for it. I hope that they, to Jill's point, like, that we don't continue to prevent that, like, hold on to it for dear life. Like, please, 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 because I think that it would drastically change the world as we know it if we kept empowering and encouraging and partnering and even sometimes moving out of the way for that fearless resolve that they just have. I mean, y'all have produced some amazing kids because they are just born with it. Like, they've just been born with it. And so that encourages me, that gets me up daily. And regardless of what we see, I'm like, okay, there it is. Like, let's go for that. Yeah.
I feel so much hope now, even in just this conversation. I already love working with youth, but being here with you experts, you leaders, people who are not afraid to be countercultural in terms of working with our youth is just amazing. So Jill, Jillian, Darlene, Candace, thank you so much for being with us. Lots of great feedback in the comments, including messages that this video needs to be shared widely. For those of you who are watching, please share with anyone in your life who works with youth and young adults so that they can experience all of this wisdom as well. Yeah, so for the Candler Foundry and Candler in Conversation, this is our break period. So we will be back in September for our next round of conversations. Until then, feel free to follow this Facebook page to learn more about our offerings, our courses in the community, any of our upcoming events. You can find there on our Facebook page, as well as on our website, candlerfoundry.emory.edu. Until we return in September, be well, be blessed, continue to encourage the young people in your life to ask big questions, as well as asking questions yourself. Take care and thanks for watching.